Well, good morning, everyone. So if you didn't see, we do have handouts over there. You're welcome to go and grab one, or you can grab one on your way out. It has a good summary of what we will be talking about today and some notes you can take home with. So they're just right there on the chair. So we'll go ahead and get started. We do want to leave, hopefully, about 20 minutes for Q&A. And so this stand right here, we'll just put right back there. And so if you have any questions as we go through, keep them in your head or write a note, and you can go ahead and come ask, and we will try to do our best to answer the questions you have. Okay, so my name is Eric Terry, and we already had an introduction, but I'm the CTO of NetAngel, and I am also the co-founder of the company with Brian McKellar, which started back in 2014. And I'm passionate about building tools to help people, not only children, to be protected on the internet and know how to safely navigate on the internet, but also to help addicts and those struggling with pornography to find a way out of the addictions that they have.
And I'm Don Monson. I live in Casper, Wyoming, and I'm in solo private practice. And as was mentioned, I've been working with addictions actually since 1982, and I've been focusing on pornography addiction since 2001. And I've seen a lot of heartache and a lot of situations where, pornography destroys lives, but I've seen a lot of hope, and I've seen a lot of good that comes from that too. So I look forward to sharing some of these thoughts with you.
So the title of our presentation today is your filter helping or hurting? So we're going to go over first 5 pitfalls of using an internet filter, and then we'll follow that up with remedies or solutions on how to combat these pitfalls. So first, I'd just like to say the internet is a place that contains both good and bad. This is obvious, but unfortunately, you can't really take away one without also taking away the other. So on the internet, it allows us to stay connected to friends and family over long distances. It allows us to learn and to educate and even to inspire. And the same technology that allows us to watch videos, inspiring videos that uplift, is the same technology that allows us to watch online sex. And the same technology that allows us to order groceries online is the same technology that allows us to order underage girls. And the same technology that gives us the privacy to protect our banking information and our personal information is the same privacy that allows you to hide your tracks on what you're doing on the internet.
Pornography is one of the most devastating addictions facing our society today. You know, it seems so innocent. You look at, hear people say, well, what's the harm in just looking at a picture or watching a video? Yet it's destroying the very fabric of our society today. One of the most, like all other addictions, pornography addiction will never be totally eliminated. But with the right tools and with the help of therapy and supporting family members and a big group of people, we can help reduce the amount of addiction, the amount of people exposed to it, and we can help people recover and find a healthy, functioning, rewarding life.
So we're going to dive into those 5 pitfalls. First one here we're going to call stealth mode. So this is when you install a filtering solution inside of your home or on a device without letting the people in that home or the user of that device know that you did so. And this can be, you could think of it as spying, and it's especially important when you're talking about adults and adult devices here. So think a spouse or perhaps a family member or a friend who you install a filter on their device without letting them know. Okay, some people do use a filter in this way, and that is why it is one of our pitfalls. Oftentimes it's used to try to catch someone in the act or to even gain evidence against them. And obviously their intentions usually are not very pure.
This creates a lot of distrust between parents and children, or husbands and wives, because of the secrecy of installing the filter without the other person being aware. The loss of trust comes from the addict because his behaviors are causing problems in the relationship, but it also causes problems when the person who's managing the filter keeps confronting them with potential issues. The addict lies, but then the person who received the information that they have been trying to access the filter, they have that information to back them up. So it creates a lot of problems in relationships between husbands and wives and between parents and children. And this issue has and can cause divorce in situations if it's taken to the extreme.
So pitfall 2 is digital parenting. I want you to take a look at that picture. It's creepy, right? There's code all over her face. Okay, so we're going to call this digital parenting, and it's essentially relying upon technology to do your parenting for you. And oftentimes when people use a filter in this way, they consider it a set and forget, where they install it, and then they have this false sense of security that everything's going to be okay. But in reality, no human being can be replaced by technology, no matter how good the filter is. And no piece of technology can ever love you like a real human being, your mom or your dad or your spouse.
And their big problem with the addict and the feelings that he's struggling with, or they're struggling with in this situation, is feelings of frustration. Because every time they get caught, they have feelings of shame, discouragement, disappointment, frustration. The addict spends more time trying to figure out how to get around the filter and also trying to find places where they can get access to the internet without a filter than they do spend trying to work on their addictive behaviors and trying to get recovery. The addict develops feelings of resentment, anger, sometimes hatred towards the person who's managing the filter, and not to mention the feelings of helplessness and hopelessness as they get deeper and deeper into their addiction.
Third pitfall, over-obsessing. So obviously no filter is perfect, no filter will ever be perfect, and things do get through. And things do get through, and they're not comprehensive. False positives can cause us to overreact as human beings when we get alerts or when we find out certain information of what has been being accessed on the internet. So this pitfall is when we have an unhealthy anxiety and stress over wondering if the filter is performing its job 100%.
And this creates levels of, again, stress and distrust in the relationship, and the person who's managing the filter as well as the addict have a lot of times where they're just focusing on the things that the filter is producing versus working on the addiction.
Okay, so next I have It's Just a Machine. And I'm glad we have some nice music behind us for you guys to enjoy. I do like that artist. Okay, so this is more the tech side of things that I'll be going over. And I've done a lot of development for filters. And there's a lot of ways that filters can be tripped or triggered. There's various ways, like looking at the website the user is going to and comparing it to what is called a blacklist of known inappropriate sites on the internet. They can also look at search terms that are being used, images and ads that pop up. But note that oftentimes filters overblock and or over-notify. For instance, I might be harmlessly looking at social media, scrolling through my feed, and someone wrote a comment on someone else's post that had inappropriate material in it. That could trigger the filter. Not only that, but pages that have links to other pages that are bad can also trigger that filter. So that user may, or that person or that child may not have actually accessed bad material, but you, again, human nature may overreact thinking that they did. And maybe you won't believe them when they come to you, right? So this is a pretty big, it's just a machine. It's a pretty big pitfall. And it's going to be aggressive. You can bypass it. There's no piece of technology on earth that doesn't allow you to bypass it. Hopefully, filters have something so that as bypassing is being attempted, you know about it, but it's not guaranteed. And finally, they're not timely. Oftentimes you have to log in, or you have to look at the daily report or even the weekly report, and it's too late, because when it comes to pornography, especially in small children, every second counts.
A filter alone doesn't fix the problem, the root of the problem, which is an empty craving that's inside the addict that is screaming to be filled. There's a need to be, for the addict to experience love, concern, compassion, and support to be able to overcome the addiction of pornography.
So I have two questions for you now that we're at this point. The first is, should we just ditch filters? Or should we just ditch the internet altogether? Sometimes I think so, right? But our message is no. In most cases, we just need to learn how to use the tool.
And a filter is just one of many tools that can be put in the toolbox for a person's recovery. And it is just a tool, but it needs to be combined with a lot of other tools to help the person to be successful in overcoming their addiction.
So I need you guys to bear with me for a moment. We're going to go through some water safety tips, which is relevant here, I promise. But these are 6 tips given to us by an article that Dr. Ari Brown wrote around the safety of water, especially with small children. And I'd like to essentially use this list as an analogy and compare it to safety around the internet and web filters. So now we're going into the remedies and solutions part of our slide here. So the first suggestion she has here for number 1 is be a water guardian. So essentially, actively and visually supervise children near and around water. When it comes to an internet filter, be an active participant in the internet experience. Number 2, teach your child to swim. Studies have found that kids age 1 to 4 who take formal swimming lessons can reduce their risk of drowning by as much as 88%. Avoiding the water altogether actually increases the risk of drowning. Oftentimes, the parent has pure intentions to try to avoid that area altogether, but in the end, it can come back to haunt them, and the thing they were trying to prevent actually comes to pass. When it comes to the internet, we believe it is best to help children learn how to safely use the internet rather than avoid it altogether. Now, of course, this is age appropriate. You don't want to be teaching your kids how to use the internet, in my opinion, at a very small age. But eventually, as the child grows, you give them an opportunity to learn how to swim. And so they don't drown when they're at that moment that something comes up and they don't know what to do on the internet. They risk drowning. Number 3, never leave your child unattended in water. So Dr. Brown talks about, you're giving your child a bath and the doorbell rings. Ignore it. Or your phone rings. Don't answer it. Be there, be present. When it comes to the internet, experts say that handing a smartphone with untethered access, with no training or guidance, and without limits or rules is like handing the keys to the car to someone without driver's ed. Why then would you give a child a device without a filter? I would hope that most parents wouldn't allow their child's girlfriend or boyfriend into their bedroom, a private space, unsupervised. But yet we give the device where they can essentially do the same thing in sexting form on their smartphone. It's a lot of power that's in their pockets. 24/7 hours a day, they can access the hardest core pornography on existence. And we give it to them without training and without anything in place to let us know what they're doing. Number 4, set up fencing or backyard pools. So they suggest 4 feet high, climb resistant, self-closing gates, and a small gap between vertical posts. When it comes to the filter, there should be some measure in place to prevent bypassing that filter or hopping over that fence near that swimming pool that's in your backyard. 5, insist on life jackets. U.S. Coast Guard approved personal flotation devices, not water wings, noodles, or inner tubes. It's not going to save someone. The type of filter matters, so don't go cheap, risking that it won't be good enough to save them. And no, filters won't save them. So it's a tool that assists in your job, just like an approved personal flotation device is. And finally, for 6, learn CPR before your child is drowning. Because it's too late when they're in that water. You need to know what you're going to do and how you're going to respond when it happens. And in the moment, because every second counts.
Now let's talk about some positive ways filters can be used to help people and their loved ones. The first one is it teaches children and adults self-control. The older and more mature a person is before they are exposed to pornography, the better chance they have of developing control and the ability to choose whether or not they want pornography to be a part of their life. If they are able to develop that self-control and that maturity, they have a better chance of making those decisions that they need to make and are better able to say no to some of the situations that will come up and confront them. If they do develop an addiction later in life, the later that a person develops the addiction, the more chance they have of being able to overcome that addiction and regain some hope and happiness in their lives. The second one, aid in preventing addiction. A filter decreases the chance of accidental or intentional exposure to pornography and increases the chance the person can mature and better develop their own set of moral values and self-control. One of the things I found in counseling is that we are all born with a blank slate in our brains as to what is sexual. And what I found in many cases is a person's first exposure to something sexual sets a template for that person as to what is exciting and what is sexual. And then that is something that they have to struggle with their whole life if that template is an unhealthy template. And many of the young men that I work with, their first exposure to something sexual is pornography. And that becomes the template for what's exciting. And then even when they're in a healthy, functioning marriage, there's still that craving and desire for pornography because that's the template that was set in their head. And they're going to struggle with that the rest of their life. And so the goal for therapy a lot of times is learning how to manage those urges and those cravings. There's nothing that will make it go away, but we can learn how to manage it and be successful and have a healthy recovery from this addiction. The third one is it fights current addictions. Like with any addiction, whether alcohol, drugs, or pornography, if a person wants to recover from that, they need to get away from the thing that they're addicted to. Filters are an enormous help in helping the addict to be able to get away from the temptations of that. Again, it's not totally foolproof. It's not something they can't get around if they try hard enough and work hard enough. It amazes me the number of teenagers that can figure out how to get around filters and things at home. But if they do want that help, the filter can really help them. For most people, the use of the internet has become a necessary part of work, school, and our everyday life. And so many people need to have access to the internet. But I also, work with a lot of people who just turning on their computer is the trigger that triggers the craving for looking up pornography. And then once that button has been pushed, they have a really hard time saying no and not going down the path and end up viewing pornography. If attempts to access pornography are made with a filter, it's blocked. And with other filters, there is a note or a notice that's given to an accountability partner letting them know that this person tried to attempt to access pornography. And then that gives the accountability partner a chance to talk with the person who's struggling with the addiction, and they can talk about it and work through things a lot more than just confronting them and getting on their case. It becomes a therapeutic and a healing process between the two people. It facilitates open and honest communication between the addicts and their loved ones. And so when the filter does report that there has been an attempt, it's important for the person who's managing the filter, we call it that an accountability partner, for them to be able to visit with and in a loving, caring, supporting way, spend time talking and encouraging and helping that person. Sometimes therapy needs to be involved, and it can be a time when a person is referred to therapy to get help if they're struggling with that. But it is a very important tool. Again, it in and by itself is not the cure, but with a lot of different things, it's very possible to help addicts to recover.
So we're going to go over 5 remedies, or how to use your filter in such a way that can help rather than hurt. 1, constant and consistent. When you install a filtering solution, your work is not done, but is just beginning. You're signing up for a journey. It's not a set and forget. And that journey is helping either teach your kids to navigate the waters of the internet safely, or to help an addict out of their addiction.
Transparency is just the opposite of the stealth mode that we had talked about earlier. It's strongly recommended that once a filter is purchased, that a discussion is had before the filter is installed to talk about why the filter was purchased, what the filter is to accomplish, and what will be reported to the accountability partner when notices are made that the person tried to access pornography.
Number 3, timeliness. So we believe that a filter should be relevant and let you know what is going on in a very timely, even instant manner. Not later that night, not later that week, but let you know so that you can do your job as a parent rather than allow the technology to be the digital parent.
And accountability is a very important point and part of helping someone who is struggling with an addiction to recover from that. They need to be held accountable for their behaviors and their actions. So it's important to sit down, most importantly ahead of time, to define what is appropriate and inappropriate sites. What is acceptable as far as searches, and what will happen if there is a notice given to the accountability partner that an attempt was made to access pornography. One of the best wording approaches for this would be, if you choose to search inappropriate sites, then you have made a choice to receive the consequences, whatever the consequences are between the accountability partner and the person struggling. This approach has the best chance of encouraging them to accept responsibility for their behaviors. Inappropriate behaviors and resulting consequences need to be very specific, clear-cut, and agreed upon in advance by all of the parties involved. Then if the rule is violated, and all the accountability partner needs to do is say, I have to respect your decision to accept this consequence.
All right, number 5, and the last remedy we have here, is connection and conversation. filtering solution should, in our opinion, promote and encourage and facilitate healthy conversations and deep connections without shame. I have a quote here that I'd like to read that is by Glenn Paul. He's a writer of a blog post on our website, NetAngel. He is also an author of a book, and that speaks about his journey through his pornography addiction and on to his recovery. So here it goes. For me, pornography was the solution for lack I felt. It wasn't the end itself, and I knew that, but it was my most trusted means to fill the void within, the void of contentment, peace, meaning, love, value, and wholeness. In short, pornography was the go-to guide on my epic holy grail search for happiness. End quote. We don't want that to happen. None of us do. Pornography should not be the replacement for real human connection. So we're going to go through 2 different questions here on 2 different slides, and then we're almost done, and then you guys can come and do the Q&A and have your questions. So this one, we're going to talk about what to do, practical advice essentially for when you find out your child is using pornography. And the next slide is when your spouse is using pornography. And it won't work in all cases. These are just some generic advice here. So number 1, stay calm when you find out your child is viewing pornography. Number 2, assure them they aren't dirty or gross. Number 3, explain how pornography is completely unrealistic. Number 4, ask if they have any questions. And number 5, keep that communication open. Don't have it be a one-time conversation. It should be an ongoing, open communication.
And if you discover that a spouse is accessing pornography, the first one is to deal with your own feelings first. A lot of times this is a real struggle for a spouse who first finds out that their spouse is accessing pornography. There's emotions of betrayal. There's a lot of lack of trust. There's hurt. I've spent a lot of time working with the spouses of people who struggle with pornography addiction, and there's a lot of dynamics and a lot of dimensions they work with. When you discover your spouse is using pornography and you are overwhelmed with these emotions, it's important to kind of take some time, and it may be a few days for you to be able to get your emotions under control, or you may not be able to confront your spouse with this, and in that case there's other alternatives. But first off, deal with your own emotions. Second, approach them when they are relatively clean and sober. The worst time to confront the addict is when they're struggling with urges and cravings to view their pornography. And that's because their emotions are up and they have a hard time focusing and listening to what is being discussed, and it just turns into a big argument. The third one is avoid shaming. Focus on the behaviors that need to be addressed more than attacking the person and putting labels on them and calling them names for what they're doing. Because shame just puts the person deeper and deeper into their addiction than helping them to climb out of it. Whereas if you're focusing on behaviors, you can address those and you can change those. Number 4 is gather the facts. Try to identify and define what their needs are, what their triggers are, what emotions are they struggling with, and how can you best support them. Number 5, offer to be of assistance. Let them know that you're committed to help and support them the very best that you can, but they need to let you know what they need you to do to be able to support the addict, to support them with that recovery. And 6, thank them for trusting you enough to share. Let them know that the openness and honesty that they shared with you in the communication is one of the big steps to healthy recovery, and that you appreciate them including you in a part of their recovery.
So how do you help? How do you have your filter help? Right here we have a good way to respond. This is taken from a NetAngel customer, a real customer of ours, who wrote this email to their adult child. And we hope that all filters and all technology can be used in this kind of a way. So I'm just going to read it right off the screen here. Good morning. It's been raining the last couple of days. The trees had just finally transitioned to beautiful colors, and now the leaves are being stripped from the trees. Beautiful, but short-lived. Hope you had a chance to enjoy the beauties of fall in the midst of your move. Noted you had a few sites blocked yesterday. I recognize this could be nothing caused by intent of action. Also recognize it could be more. Want to talk about it? Other than an appointment in the late afternoon, I can free up the rest of my night for your availability. Love you, Dad. I want to dedicate my entire life towards building the tools to help facilitate that, because that is beautiful. And I hope that all of you can be able to have the tools you need and trust and handle your own emotions to be able to talk to your spouse or your child or a loved one in that way that builds healthy conversation and communication, that can help children to avoid the dangers of the internet, or at least know how to navigate around those dangers to protect them for as long as possible in their innocence. And we also hope that filters can be used in a way that can help the addict and those struggling with pornography who want help find a way out. And thank you.
And when a struggle with pornography is first identified, it looks as a big negative. But with the counseling that I've done, it can go either way, depending on how it's handled. And if it is handled correctly, it can be a relationship building and bonding situation and journey that people go through. And it can bring couples and parents and children closer together. But if it's handled wrong, it is very negative and can be destructive to relationships, either between parents and children or husbands and wives. And so the important thing is that we handle our pornographic situations, addictions, whatever the problem is, in an appropriate way so that it becomes a healing, mending, and people end up healthier from that versus a destructive, painful experience. Thank you.
So we'd like to go ahead and invite Allie, who's in the back. You can go ahead and come up. This is Allie Johnson. She is one of our support representatives at our company, and she has a unique perspective that I hope you guys will take advantage of in your questions. So we're going to go ahead. We have about 25 minutes, which is great. So hopefully you guys have some interesting things for us. But let's just briefly just kind of say what we can do as far as the type of questions that we'd love to answer, but also anything is on the table. I'm obviously very tech focused, so I do a lot of software development. So any of your tech questions that you have regarding filters, ask away.
And I can cover relationship things, how to handle situations, how to communicate with your loved one who's struggling, or even if, the person himself has the addiction, and where to find help and how to proceed from there.
And I simply am a spouse of a recovering pornography addict. That's why I feel sometimes my view can be a little more unique to just identify with some of you guys and the different experiences that you've had. I also have a lot of opportunities with our customers. I am our customer service manager. And I have a lot of interaction with people who have an addiction themselves or a spouse, and they just want to know how to handle it and how to respond. And so that's what I do.
Okay, so make sure your mouth is close enough to the mic that we can all hear it, but it's open. You can go ahead and come up to the mic.
Can you go back a few slides? I couldn't write down fast enough the revenues for children.
We also have a handout that lists all of those
It
for
does,
you.
okay.
Oh, does it not?
Oh.
Okay, I lied.
Okay, thank you for correcting us. Which one?
The children.
That's it? Okay. We also, just for your information, both of those slides are full-blown blog posts on netangel.com/blog. So there's a lot more content and meat for each of those points.
I have a question. So I'm a therapist. I work with children, and families sometimes have a hard time finding filters for finding something that's going to work well. What recommendations do you have for like them researching and finding something that's going to work well for them?
So I'm not a believer in one filter that fits the box completely. Even my own filtering solution that we've developed here is not going to be the solution for everyone. So as far as the criteria for what to look for in a filter, I would say those 5 remedies or solutions would be a good place to start. How easy is it to get installed on all your devices, and how easy is it for you to glean the information you need to assist you in doing your job, right? Doing your task, and assisting in either protecting children or adults or whatever your situation is. So I would say, is it timely? Is it relevant? Can you get the information you need? Does it have basic protections of does it let you know, or does it notify you when someone's trying to bypass it to get around it? Hopefully some of that helps. But yeah, there's no one filter. As far as technology goes, there is also different types. Some of these will be some words if you want you can write down. There's VPN filters, which do a really good job of being comprehensive, looking at large portions of the page and scanning content, and oftentimes those that scan the entire content through VPN or proxy, etc., have overblocking. So if you have something like that, just be aware that it could overblock. DNS is another one that you guys can look up. DNS is just the blacklisting. So when you go to a site, it'll just compare that site with a pre-known list of blacklisted sites, which obviously has the disadvantage of, if it's out of date and a new site came up today, it's not going to be on that blacklist. There's other technologies, but I'll leave it at that unless you guys have more questions around it.
Thanks for your presentation so far. So my question is, I've got 5 children, 8 and under, and they're just getting to the age where, right now it's mostly just Netflix, but they want to start watching YouTube videos. And the only filter I've got was Circle, and and it could be just lack of technological savvy on my end, but it was just blocking certain sites. And so to me, it was like, well, what if they went to a random site that I didn't even know about? And then also like YouTube. So if you block YouTube, then they can't watch their fun little shows that are clean. So is there any advice you have, or does the filter through NetAngel or others allow you? Because what I'm worried about is they're watching a clean YouTube video, and we're right there with them, but then a few clicks, and then all of a sudden they're into a dirty one, right? So is there any filter that can prevent that from happening?
There are websites out there. I think one's called Clean YouTube. Does anyone know it? Is it clean? It's like cleanyoutube.com or something. And what they've strived to do is have all the content available on YouTube served through that site without the garbage, right? And without the autoplay. Because that's the big thing about YouTube is you watch, you as a parent go do something else, and it has another suggestion, and there's even been TED Talks on those algorithms and how they they are tailored especially towards kids' brains, and they click on and they keep going, and now they're in dark stuff that's talking about masturbation, right? So YouTube via DNS has the ability to basically enforce safe mode, where it does its best it can. YouTube is owned by Google, so Google does the best it can with its own filtering solution to not show you inappropriate videos. Obviously, it's not perfect, and there's two different settings, a strict setting and a moderate setting. Many filters out there will allow you to do that. Just look. Does it enforce Google's safe mode? Does it do that for YouTube as well? And if so, and it uses DNS to do so, then you can toggle those settings to help.
So when we're looking into a filter, we're going to look at, okay, does this have a DNS option? Is that what
I would look more for, does it allow you to toggle safe mode on YouTube and Google and Bing and other sites?
Okay.
I think I'm getting it wrong. What is it? Safe mode? Safe?
It's safe search.
Safe search. Yeah. Wow. There you go. So safe search. Look for that, because most likely they're not, or restricted mode. Most likely they will not probably say specifically DNS unless you actually look more into the technology, because a lot of people don't know what that is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Do you mind if I say
Yeah.
And
Ali
let
has.
me- and let me talk about the human side of that for just a minute real quick. There's a concept out there called social inoculation, and where you have several kids that are reaching the age that they're wanting to start doing that. Their exposure and accidental exposure to that is just going to happen. So to really help them, what you need to do is inoculate them from these kind of things, in a sense, just like you would inoculate somebody against a disease. And you sit down with them and you talk about, what did you just watch? How did you feel? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? What do you need to do next time something like that happens? So that they can know how to handle those situations. And they can know that, okay, this is not acceptable. We don't need to watch this. Because, I've heard a lot of different stories where little kids will go up to somebody who's smoking and say, you're not supposed to smoke because it's not healthy for you. Well, that's social inoculation, and this can be used for this concept also, is teaching kids what to do when those come across, how to avoid them, but help them to feel some control also of what to do, and that you're there, you're willing to talk with them, and you're open, and it's not going to be getting upset, but having a discussion with them.
I'll be brief. I know we have other questions. Something that this is a personal decision. I also think this is a really big part of what we believe is that human connection and intervention. We, again, personal choice, we don't watch YouTube at home because the decision I've made to be an active participant in my children's viewing experience of the television is, if I can't sit and watch it with them to make sure it's okay, they don't watch it. If we're watching Blippi, anybody? No? If we're watching Blippi, they can watch that on YouTube, and that's great. As soon as I leave the room, it's turned off, whether it's on TV, a tablet, a phone. I think that's part of being an active parent. So that's, again, another part where a filter is great, but don't let that pitfall come in to rely on the filter to do that part for you.
Thank you. I think that leads into my question a little bit. So I have, I'm a nurse, and I also have a dance school, and I have 5 kids, all ages. And one thing that was mentioned earlier was, so I'm more interested on the healing aspect. Prevention, I think, is important, but we know our kids are exposed. It's just the day that we're in. But a thing that was mentioned that I found interesting was that trigger comment. So my question is there ways to desensitize our kids to the point where that, turning on the computer doesn't elicit triggers in myself or in them to create a more healthier environment? Because I think I've been a little bit like this friend here, a little on this extreme to where, no YouTube, no. And I think sometimes that does create a fear or a heightened trigger. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I spend a lot of time when I'm working with my clients on identifying what their triggers are. And there are ways to desensitize, but before they're desensitized, some of the important things to do first is to define them and identify them. Then, if a person knows what their triggers are, if they have the opportunity to anticipate this trigger is going to be coming up because of a situation I'm in or whatever it is, they can start to prepare their minds already that there's a chance I could be exposed to this because they know this trigger is coming. If they don't know that trigger is coming up, then a lot of times what they do is we talk about how to approach that once that hits. Because a lot of times they'll get into that, they'll feel the trigger, they'll feel the craving and the urge, and then we talk about what do you do with those urges? Where do you go? Who are you with? I work a lot with, teenagers, and they'll hit a trigger, and I'll say, the first thing you need to do is go get out in public. Be somewhere where there's somebody, because you're not going to follow through with that. And I heard, many years ago that with any urge or desire, if a person can bear through it for 15 to 20 minutes, that urge will go away. And a lot of times people feel that this urge is just going to be here forever, and I guess I'm going to have to give into it to get rid of it. But you don't have to. So, if you can know what the triggers are, you can anticipate what they are, when you're going to be exposed to them, and then also have a game plan of what to do if that trigger hits and those cravings and urges start. What to do with that. And then the desensitizing part is the more a person can have experiences away from the trigger, then the less strength that trigger has. Just let me give you an example of, let's just say turning on the computer, and that's their trigger, and the more incidences they have of turning on the computer, going to an appropriate site, using it the way they need to use it, and then turn it off, and they don't go into that, every time they do that, that just builds a little bit more for, desensitizing them to that trigger.
Excellent, very good.
I have a technological question for Mr. Terry. Thank you for your time and appreciate your presentation today. My question has to do with all filter solutions. And when you apply them, typically you see a drastic decrease in your bandwidth speed. So while that doesn't matter for some that have like gigabit, we have a lot of families that are in rural situations, and that can really impact the overall internet experience. That's my first question. And the other one has to do with VPNs. And does your product use a VPN?
Our iOS solution uses a VPN, and so does our Mac solution. Yeah.
Okay.
So we partially use it.
So I've used the Circle that was mentioned earlier. My kids hated it, which was a good thing, but the VPN would conflict with the school district network, and it was a problem. So when the kids got to high school, oftentimes they couldn't even use their device for legitimate schoolwork because that VPN was having a conflict. That's my second question. Thank you.
Yeah, if you could stay there. Okay, so bandwidth was your first question. Do you work with a group? You said families in rural. Is this for you personally, or is this a question?
This is for me to take back to a church organization.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. So there's different technologies. Some are a lot more abrasive on the network and can cause a lot more slower speeds with bandwidth. I know our original VPN solution would knock you down to about 15 megabits per second, even 10, which obviously is not happy when you're a gigabit customer on your ISP, right? VPN, by nature of VPN and the technology it uses, is gonna slow it down, no matter what. So if you see a solution that does that, just be aware it's gonna slow down your internet. For a lot of people, it's worth it. It's worth slow internet in order to get the filtering protection they need. DNS is going to be, and proxy as well. Proxy will most of the time be slow. There's also inline filtering, where essentially it doesn't use like an acronym like that, but it just does filtering on the device itself. most of the time, that kind of filtering will be fast as well. DNS, by nature of DNS, is a very fast service on the internet. And that's going to be your top bandwidth performer. In fact, it shouldn't affect it at all. So if you use a DNS solution, if you have gigabit, you should have gigabit internet filtered. Okay, so the second question, yeah, I mean, I think every VPN, like I said, is probably the worst as far as it may not work in schools or churches or other networks. Most likely it will on your home. But even DNS, surprising enough, some internet service providers in some areas block DNS from working, or they hijack it to use their own DNS servers. So it's kind of a tricky thing because you may have to just trial and error, right? Try Circle, okay. Well, you said it didn't work on the school network. Okay, well, try another one, right? Try another one and try to mix and match your technologies until you get it right. Because we have no claim also on our filter that it's not going to not work on someone's network.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we have about, I believe, 3 minutes left for so you might be the last one, might be one more after that.
I'll be quick. I just have a comment. For those of you who have additional technology questions, we have several technology experts just right outside this room standing at the tables, and we'd be very happy for you to come talk to us anytime during the conference. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I should have brought that up. That's great.
Okay, a little lower. Can you hear me? Okay. This question's for Dawn. I have 3 daughters, and even though they've been raised in the same household, they're very different from each other. My 14-year-old and 6-year-old seem to be addicted to technology in general, and my 13-year-old doesn't even faze her. And I'm wondering, how do we teach them self-control or prevent, I guess addiction's already present, but how to prevent that, I guess.
Okay, well, let me use this one. With developing the self-control, a lot of times in those kind of situations is you need to put limits and very, well-defined, well-managed boundaries and limits of, okay, the phone goes off at 10 o'clock and doesn't go on till this certain time, or you can play this game or watch this for a certain amount of time and then it needs to go off. And yeah, in the beginning you get a lot of fight back, and the kids aren't very happy about that, especially if they're used to it and now you're taking it away from them. But within time they get used to that, and then they can start to control themselves. Now, part of that too is, like I mentioned also, is there needs to be consequences. Consequences that if they go past it, consequences if they sneak and get on the whatever the device is without permission. And one of the good consequences for that is continued absence from that device. So if you don't stay within these limits, then tomorrow you don't get to use the device at all. And so set up consequences, set up boundaries, be very specific. And then one of the hardest things for parents to do is to be consistent. Because if we're in a good mood and everything's going well, it's easy to say, it's okay, don't worry about it today. But we need to be very consistent with that, because they watch that and they recognize what's going on. So, setting up rules, consequences, and visiting with them, and having a good conversation with them and why it's important. What are the dangers? What are the potentials? And a lot of times they kind of poo-poo those away in the beginning, but it's important for them to know that these kind of things could happen.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, I just wanted to share, first of all, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It's so important to know how to use your filter effectively, because it can either help your family, and it can help you, or it can harm you. And you want to use the tool the best way you can to build constructive relationships with your family. If your kid is at college, with his friends, that's really what it's all about, is building these important human connections so that these conversations can happen. If they haven't happened in your home yet, I really encourage you to go home and tell your kids, hey, this is a safe environment for us to talk about this. If you have questions, you can come to me. If you don't have a filter yet, get one. Pick one, do your research, find what's best for you. And like Eric said, try a few different ones out. See what's best. And have that conversation with your spouse and your children. That transparency is so important. Make sure that you talk to them about what's going to happen. This is how the filter is going to be used. This is what it's going to do. This is what it's going to tell us and how it's going to help us as a family. Something that I really believe in is a family technology contract or a plan, a family plan that holds everybody in the family accountable, including the parents and the spouses or the grandparents. Make everybody part of the plan. We talked a little bit about that. Consequences, creating that accountability partner contract, make them part of it. If technology is an addiction in your home, even just in general, include your kids in the process and say, hey, these are some of the rules we're thinking about. What do you think? And what do you think some appropriate consequences would be? What should the results be if we break this contract? And have everybody sign it. Make it formal. Make it real. Put it up somewhere. We have a sample contract on our website. If you go to netangel.com/blog, Dawn has actually created a really wonderful accountability contract. That website should be on the papers that you have. So we just really want to encourage that you use a filter and make sure that you use it effectively and in a constructive, building way for your family. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.